The grand hall of the Valencia Estate Banquet Center glittered like a scene from a royal fairy tale. Expensive white lilies curled from crystal vases, golden lights danced across marble floors, and a symphony orchestra softly played in the background. Raymond Okonkwo, a man whose wealth could command empires, stood before a full-length mirror in a custom-tailored tuxedo worth more than a civil servant's annual salary. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, the day he would finally marry Cassandra, the elegant and refined woman who had been by his side for the past 3 years. Guests poured into the hall, politicians, celebrities, and industry tycoons, all seated with expectations high. Cameras from entertainment blogs were already rolling, capturing the event live. Everything had been planned to perfection, except for the unexpected face that sent shivers down his spine the moment he saw her. Raymond had been reviewing the seating chart with his best man when his eyes drifted to the far side of the hall, where catering staff were finalizing the table arrangements. One of the female cleaners, in a plain black uniform and cap that partially hid her face, moved quickly from table to table, wiping surfaces with brisk, efficient motions. At first glance, she looked like any other staff member, but something about her stride, her posture, familiar yet hesitant, caught his attention. Then she turned. His breath caught. It was Adora, the woman he had once loved with all his heart, the woman he had once married and divorced in rage. Her face, though more tired and worn than he remembered, still bore the soft beauty that had once haunted his dreams. And worse, her eyes briefly met his and widened in horror before quickly lowering, as she ducked her head and hurried away. For a moment, time froze for Raymond. The noise of the crowd, the hum of the orchestra, all faded into silence. Memories he had long buried came rushing back. The night he'd thrown her out of the house, her cries as she pleaded with him to believe her, the pained look in her eyes when she told him she was carrying his child. But he hadn't believed her, not then. Not when Cassandra had shown him what looked like irrefutable proof of Adora's infidelity. Photos, text messages, even a doctor's note suggesting she had been pregnant before their last encounter. Raymond had erupted in fury, declared her a liar, and filed for divorce before their baby was born. And now, here she was, reduced from the wife of a millionaire to a cleaner at his wedding. The humiliation must be unbearable for her, but he couldn't look away. Questions began to swirl in his mind, questions he had ignored for too long. Why was she here? Why hadn't she remarried or moved on? And why, in the brief moment their eyes met, did she still look at him with that familiar pain instead of resentment? The moment Raymond stepped out of the main hall, his mind was spinning like a faulty compass. The sight of Adora, his Adora, reduced to scrubbing tables at his wedding, had thrown everything into chaos. He found an empty hallway behind the banquet kitchen and leaned against the wall, trying to collect his thoughts. His chest rose and fell with silent intensity as memories came rushing back like a tidal wave. He had once adored her, worshipped her like she was the air he breathed. Their love had been simple, pure, and passionate. But 3 years ago, everything changed. The storm began when Cassandra, then a friend of his inner circle, had shown him a set of damning text messages and photos that she claimed were from Adora's phone. The messages suggested that Adora had been seeing another man, a business associate of Raymond's, while still married to him. Cassandra had even provided hospital documentation claiming Adora's pregnancy didn't align with their last known time together. Fueled by jealousy and heartbreak, Raymond confronted Adora that night. She wept, begged, and tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He could still remember her screams, how she held her stomach as if trying to protect the unborn child from his anger. She insisted the baby was his. But he had already made up his mind. He'd allowed Cassandra to poison his heart with doubt. He told Adora to leave the house immediately, refused her calls, blocked her messages, and had his lawyers push the divorce papers through without mercy. Back then, he told himself he was justified. He was the wronged one. But now, with the shock of seeing her again, cracks were forming in the version of events he had clung to for years. Could it all have been a lie? A cruel manipulation? He had never bothered to do a paternity test, never gave Adora a real chance to defend herself. And now, seeing the haunted look in her eyes, the same soft face that had once comforted him in his darkest hours. He began to feel something he had buried long ago, regret. But regret was dangerous. It was a bridge to truths that had long been left unexplored, and Raymond wasn't ready to walk that path just yet. He returned to the grand hall, but nothing looked the same. Every golden decoration felt fake. The orchestra sounded like noise. Even Cassandra, standing in the spotlight greeting guests, looked like a stranger to him now. As she turned toward him, radiant in her white and gold gown, her smile faltered for just a second when she saw his face. He was pale, distracted. She tried to take his hand, but he pulled away instinctively. Something inside him had shifted, and Cassandra sensed it. Her smile returned, but her eyes sharpened, calculating. Raymond murmured something about needing air and stepped away again, his mind fixed on one thing. He needed to find Adora. He needed answers. And above all, he needed to see the child, the one she had with her, the one who bore an uncanny resemblance to himself. If there was even a chance that child was his, then everything he believed, everything he had built with Cassandra, was a lie. Raymond's heart pounded as he stepped into the service area behind the reception hall, a place no millionaire groom had any business being on his wedding day. He moved past startled waiters and security, ignoring their confused glances. He scanned every face, searching for Adora, but she was nowhere in sight. Then, through a half-open door leading to the outdoor parking lot, he caught sight of her again. She was kneeling beside a small boy, helping him tie his shoelaces. The child looked up as she finished, and Raymond's breath caught in his throat. There, staring back at him with wide, curious eyes, was a miniature version of himself. The resemblance was striking. Same jawline, same brows, same slightly crooked smile. Even the boy's dimples were identical to the ones Raymond had been teased about as a child. It was as if he were staring at a younger version of himself. Every doubt, every lie Cassandra had planted, began to crumble in that moment. He stood frozen, watching them interact. Adora gently brushed the boy's shirt and adjusted his cap. She looked tired but tender, her eyes filled with a kind of motherly love that couldn't be faked. The boy leaned against her, and she hugged him tightly, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh. That laugh, it even sounded like his. Raymond's hands clenched at his sides. How had he missed this? How had he gone 3 years believing that this child wasn't his? He remembered all the nights he'd spent in silence, trying to move on, convincing himself he had done the right thing by casting Adora out. But here was the proof, living, breathing, undeniable. If he had allowed himself a single moment of clarity back then, if he hadn't been so quick to believe the lies, his son might have been growing up in his arms instead of behind the kitchen doors of his wedding hall. Without thinking, he took a step forward. The movement caught Adora's attention. Her eyes lifted, and for the second time that day, they locked eyes. But this time, it wasn't just pain he saw. It was panic. She quickly pulled her son close and stood up, placing herself protectively between the boy and Raymond. "What do you want, Raymond?" she asked quietly, her voice a mix of exhaustion and wariness. "Haven't you done enough?" Raymond opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wasn't ready for this confrontation. Not yet. Not without knowing the full truth. "That's his," he stammered, pointing at the boy. "Is he mine?" Adora's face crumbled, her eyes glistening. But she said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, holding the boy's hand tightly. And Raymond, once confident and proud, was left trembling in the shadows, consumed by a single burning need, the truth. Raymond returned to the groom's suite with a storm raging inside him. Every step he took echoed with disbelief and fury, at himself, at Cassandra, at the tangled web he had allowed to rule his decisions. He sat down and stared at his reflection in the mirror, but what he saw wasn't a confident groom. It was a man who had lost something precious and only now realized the cost. Cassandra knocked lightly and entered the room, her voice sweet as ever. "Ray, are you okay? You've been gone a while." He turned slowly, measuring every word before speaking. "Why did you hate Adora so much?" The question caught her off guard, and her carefully crafted smile faltered for a second. "What are you talking about?" she asked, feigning confusion. "You told me she cheated. You brought me those messages, those test results. You pushed for everything to be done quickly." "Why?" Cassandra blinked, then laughed nervously. "Ray, that was 3 years ago. Why are we even talking about this on our wedding day?" But Raymond didn't smile. "I just saw her. She was here, cleaning tables." Cassandra's eyes widened. "She what?" she hissed, before quickly recovering. "That's not possible. She probably came to cause drama. You know how manipulative she can be." Raymond stood and walked slowly toward her. "She had a child with her. A boy who looks exactly like me. Dimples, eyes, even the way he stands. You told me he wasn't mine. You showed me proof. But I never actually saw the test results myself, Cassandra. You said they were handled by your cousin at the clinic." Her expression darkened. "Raymond, you're making a mistake. She's playing you again. She knows today is important and wants to ruin it. Don't let her in." But her voice shook, and Raymond saw it, the subtle tremble, the flicker of panic in her eyes. For the first time, he began to truly doubt her. "I'm going to find out the truth," he said coldly. "And if I find out you lied to me, everything ends." The temperature in the room shifted. Cassandra's sweet tone vanished. She stood silent, her eyes narrowing as her lips tightened into a thin line. "You think you can walk away from me now? On our wedding day," she whispered. "After everything I gave up for you?" But Raymond was done listening. He picked up his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and dialed a private investigator he had once used during a corporate case. As the call connected, Cassandra slammed the door on her way out, her heels echoing in rage down the corridor. Raymond's voice was steady as he spoke into the phone. "I need you to dig into something for me. A DNA test. Discreet. And find out if a doctor named Nduka falsified any records 3 years ago." When he ended the call, he stood by the window, staring out into the city skyline. The wedding would proceed, the guests would cheer, but behind the scenes, a reckoning had begun. And Raymond Okonkwo would not rest until he uncovered every shadow that had destroyed his family. Adora sat behind the event hall in the staff quarters, tears quietly spilling down her cheeks as she clutched her son, Chinedu, to her chest. She hadn't expected to see Raymond again, at least not like this. Watching him prepare to marry the woman who had destroyed their lives was like ripping open an old wound that never really healed. When she had taken the cleaning job through a friend who worked with the catering company, she hadn't known it was for his wedding. It was meant to be a quick, discreet gig to pay off school fees. But the universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Her heart had nearly stopped the moment she locked eyes with Raymond across the banquet hall. She had turned away quickly, hoping he hadn't seen her, but his presence lingered like a fire burning the back of her neck. Now, Chinedu sat beside her, drawing shapes on the dusty concrete with a stick, oblivious to the emotional hurricane that threatened to sweep her away. The years hadn't been kind to her. After the divorce, life became a maze of rejection, hardship, and survival. People she had once called friends turned their backs. Family members blamed her, whispering behind her back that she must have done something to deserve being thrown out like trash. With nowhere to go, she'd found herself living in a cramped, single-room apartment, struggling to make ends meet with menial jobs. She had carried Raymond's child in shame, with no support, not even a word from the man she once loved. She remembered the nights she sat awake, wondering how a man who had once sworn to protect her could discard her so quickly based on lies. But she never stopped loving him, and she never told Chinedu anything bad about his father. She wanted her son to have someone to look up to, even if from a distance. She often told him, "Your daddy is a great man," even when she was mopping restaurant floors just to buy his school books. Her only solace in the last few years had been her child. Chinedu was the reason she woke up each day and kept fighting. He had Raymond's intelligence, his calm temperament, and even his charming dimples. Every time she looked at him, she saw the life that could have been a life of laughter, of shared moments, of parenting together. Seeing Raymond again reopened every scar, every wound she had carefully bandaged over the years. But what confused her was the look in his eyes when he saw Chinedu. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was recognition, a quiet knowing. For the first time, Adora felt a flicker of hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope led to pain. She had to protect her son from being hurt again. And so, she resolved to avoid Raymond, no matter what. She wouldn't let him walk back into their lives, only to disappear again. But deep in her heart, she knew some truths could not stay buried forever. 3 years ago, Cassandra had been nothing more than a background character in Raymond's life. A stylish, intelligent woman with connections and charm. She was always in the right place at the right time. She befriended Adora first, gaining her trust like a snake waiting to strike. At the time, Cassandra claimed to be a struggling event planner, seeking guidance from Adora, who then worked in Raymond's foundation. Adora, ever kind-hearted, welcomed her. But behind Cassandra's painted smile was a meticulous plan. She had long desired Raymond, not just for love, but for status, wealth, and power. And when she discovered Adora was pregnant, she saw her opportunity. She started small, planting doubts in Raymond's mind about Adora's late nights and mysterious calls. Then came the fake messages, manipulated images, and forged hospital records she got through her cousin, a corrupt technician at a private clinic. The web she wove was tight, flawless, and destructive. Cassandra had expected some resistance from Raymond, but to her delight, he had erupted with fury when she planted the final nail. A forged message implying Adora had lied about the paternity of the child. Cassandra played her role to perfection, supportive, concerned, and present during his lowest point. It didn't take long for Raymond to lean on her, to confide in her, to eventually fall into her arms. She let him grieve the betrayal, while secretly celebrating her success. She had destroyed a union, and now she was free to build her empire at his side. Over time, she ingratiated herself with his business partners, charmed his board members, and even helped him expand his real estate holdings. To the world, she was the perfect fiancée. But Cassandra had one rule: never let Adora or that child re-enter their lives. That was the one loose end she couldn't afford. So when she saw Raymond pacing the wedding hall earlier, visibly shaken, she knew something was wrong. And when he confronted her in the groom's suite, demanding answers about Adora, fear began to creep into her spine like ice. But Cassandra was a master manipulator. She had faced crises before: business lawsuits, betrayal, competition, and always came out unscathed. Still, this was different. Raymond wasn't just suspicious, he was waking up. Cassandra realized she had underestimated the power of blood, the undeniable pull of a father recognizing his child. And now, with the wedding only hours away, she was backed into a corner. She needed to act fast. Damage control wasn't an option anymore. She would have to eliminate Adora from the picture again, but this time more permanently. She didn't know how yet. But she wasn't going to lose everything she had built just because one woman dared to come back into the picture. No, Adora would disappear again, one way or another. Later that evening, Raymond sat in his hotel suite staring at the test kit he had discreetly ordered through a trusted lab associate. His fingers trembled as he sealed the envelope containing a few strands of Chinitu's hair he had picked from the boy's discarded cap earlier that day. He had to know. He couldn't rely on words or memories anymore. This time, he needed evidence, cold, scientific proof that the boy was his. Yet, deep down, he already knew the answer. That boy was his mirror image, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Still, he had to be sure. He handed the envelope to his assistant with strict instructions to handle it confidentially. As the door closed behind him, Raymond sighed and stared out the window. Beneath the glittering skyline, he saw only a world built on lies. And now, those lies were falling apart one truth at a time. Cassandra returned to the suite shortly after, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She smiled, but Raymond didn't respond. He could sense the pressure behind her charm, the desperation behind her elegance. "Why so quiet?" she asked, her voice laced with sugar. He looked at her, then asked bluntly, "Did you ever consider the damage you caused when you made me believe that child wasn't mine?" The room went still. Cassandra's hand trembled slightly, but she masked it with a chuckle. "Raymond, we've been over this. Adora betrayed you. I only helped you see the truth. He rose to his feet. No, you helped me destroy my own family. And now I'm finding out the truth for myself. Cassandra's face hardened. So what now? You'll just throw everything away because you saw some woman crying with a child? Don't forget everything I've done for you. I was there when you were broken. I helped rebuild your name. Her voice cracked, not with sorrow, but rage. Raymond walked past her and opened the door. Maybe that's the problem. You rebuilt my life, but on ruins. And now I want my foundation back. My real family. Cassandra's face twisted in fury as she hurled the champagne glass across the room. It shattered against the wall behind him. But he didn't flinch. She screamed his name, demanding he return to reason, but Raymond was already gone. Down the hall, into the elevator, out into the city night where the truth waited for him. He had wasted years in a loveless alliance, blinded by manufactured betrayal. But now the lies were unraveling, and his heart was pointing him back to the one woman he had wronged, and the child who had waited unknowingly for his father. Whatever it took, Raymond was ready to face the truth, even if it destroyed his name, even if it shattered his world. Because for the first time in years, he was choosing love over pride. The rain poured mercilessly that night as Adora walked home with Chinedu, the hem of her faded wrapper soaked and her worn-out slippers squishing with each step. Chinedu clung to her hand, tired but silent, his innocence shielding him from the emotional war raging in his mother's chest. They had taken the long way home after leaving the venue. She had wanted to avoid any chance encounter with Raymond again. Seeing him had reopened wounds she had tried so hard to bury, and his question, "Is he mine?" echoed endlessly in her mind. Part of her wanted to scream yes, to pour out the truth and collapse in his arms. But the other part, the mother in her, was guarded, cautious. What if this was just another storm that would leave them drenched and broken all over again? She had no energy for heartbreak anymore. Not with a son whose life depended on her strength. Their home was in the slums of Amukoko, a far cry from the luxurious estates she had once called home. A single, musty room with a rusted ceiling fan that barely spun. The floor was cracked, the paint peeling. But within those walls, there was peace, fragile, humble peace. She placed a bowl of leftover rice on the small wooden table and sat beside Chinedu, brushing his hair gently. He didn't complain, didn't ask about the big hall or the man who had stared at him like he was someone important. He simply ate, then lay beside her and asked her to sing him a song. She sang softly, the same lullaby she'd sung when he was a baby in her womb, when she cried herself to sleep and whispered prayers for survival. After he slept, she sat in the darkness, lit only by a flickering candle, her eyes fixed on nothing and everything all at once. It had taken Adora years to find some kind of rhythm in the chaos life had thrown her way. She had worked as a housekeeper, waitress, market vendor, and even once as a cleaner in a hospital where the stench of death clung to her nostrils. Also, Chinedu could eat, go to school, and never feel the shame of being fatherless. She never told him the truth about Raymond, not because she wanted to protect Raymond's image, but because she wanted her son to live without bitterness. She had long accepted that she might never clear her name, might never know why her husband turned against her so violently, so suddenly. The lies Cassandra spread had poisoned everything. Adora had tried to explain once, but Raymond had stormed out and never looked back. She remembered how, days later, his lawyers sent her divorce papers like she was a criminal. No trial, no paternity test, just finality. It was that moment she stopped hoping and started surviving. And now he was back. But Adora wasn't that same woman anymore. She was stronger, wiser, and she would not let her son be broken the way she had been. Raymond couldn't sleep. The suite was too cold, too large, and far too quiet. His mind kept circling back to Adora and the boy. He tried to focus on the wedding plans, calls to photographers, confirmations with decorators, but it all felt pointless. Everything felt like a distraction from the truth. On impulse, he returned to his old mansion in Lekki, the one he had once shared with Adora before the chaos. The building, now managed by caretakers, had been locked for months. As he walked through the familiar halls, dust layered every surface. But the memories came alive. This was where he had laughed with her, celebrated their anniversaries, dreamed of raising children together. He paused in what used to be her reading corner, a small space beneath the staircase with her favorite armchair and a shelf of romance novels. He ran his fingers over the cracked spine of a book and, to his surprise, found something wedged inside. It was a letter, folded, yellowed, and sealed with care. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Adora's. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The letter had clearly never been sent. She had written it on the night of their final fight. The words were raw, emotional, pleading. Raymond, I don't know why you've chosen to believe lies over the truth. I don't know what Cassandra told you or what evidence she gave you, but I swear on everything I hold dear, I have never betrayed you. This child is yours. I only wanted us to be a family, but you won't even look me in the eye. I'm scared. I don't know where I'll go, but I will survive, for this child and for the memory of the man I once loved with all my soul. Raymond sank into the chair, the letter trembling in his hands as his chest tightened with guilt. How had he missed this? How had he let his pride, his anger, and Cassandra's poison blind him so completely? The letter was filled with a pain that echoed his own now, a grief for something precious destroyed too soon. He thought back to the way she had cried when he accused her, the way her voice broke when she screamed that she was telling the truth. He hadn't listened. He had been a coward, a fool. He had walked away from his family without giving her the decency of proof. He let Cassandra handle everything, including the so-called DNA test that he now knew was never real. And now he had a son, 3 years old, beautiful, full of promise, who probably thought his father was dead or had never existed. Raymond pressed the letter to his chest and whispered into the empty room, I'm so sorry. But apologies couldn't fix the past. Only action could. And Raymond Okonkwo had finally decided to act. The DNA result came 2 days later, discreetly delivered by a trusted lab agent who owed Raymond a favor. The envelope felt heavy in his hands as he sat alone in the groom's lounge. With shaky fingers, he tore it open and read the result. Paternity likelihood, 99.9%. He blinked once, then again. It was like the world stood still. The child was his. Chinedu was his son. He had been lied to, manipulated, and made to believe the worst about the woman he once adored. A strange mix of grief, anger, and joy washed over him. He thought he'd feel vindicated. Instead, he felt like a man drowning in a sea of regret. He had missed Chinedu's first words, his first steps, his birthdays. He had abandoned them both, left them to fend for themselves while he played the fool beside Cassandra. Raymond rose to his feet with a renewed sense of purpose. The wedding was in 24 hours, but now it was the last thing on his mind. He picked up his phone and called Cassandra, asking her to meet him privately. She hesitated but agreed, likely sensing the tension in his voice. They met in the empty venue ballroom that evening. She walked in smiling, but her smile disappeared the moment she saw the envelope in his hand. What's that? She asked, though her tone had already shifted. Proof, Raymond replied. Proof that you lied. The child is mine. You stole my family from me, Cassandra. She tried to protest, to twist the truth, but he didn't let her speak. You forged documents. You bribed people. You convinced me to destroy my marriage. And now I know everything. Her eyes flared with panic. Raymond, wait, listen to me. No, he cut her off, voice firm but calm. I'm done listening to lies. Cassandra stepped back, stunned. She had never seen this version of him, cold, resolute, unmoved by her tears. You ruined my life, Cassandra. You didn't just take a wife from me. You stole my son. And now you expect a wedding. His words sliced through her like a blade. He dropped the envelope on the table beside her and walked out of the room without another word. Cassandra stood frozen, her perfect world crashing around her. The media, the guests, the empire she built on deception, it was all about to come down. Meanwhile, Raymond walked outside into the night air, his heart heavy, but his purpose clear. He had made the biggest mistake of his life, But it wasn't too late to fix it. Not if Adora would let him. Not if Chinedu could look him in the eye and one day call him daddy. That was all that mattered now. The day of the wedding dawned with deceptive calm. The sky was cloudless, the breeze mild, and the event hall buzzed with activity. Guests in regal attire arrived in droves, unaware that beneath the polished surface, a storm was brewing. Raymond sat alone in the groom's suite, still dressed in his undershirt, staring at the invitation cards scattered on the floor. The ring box lay open beside him, untouched. Every sound from outside, the laughter, the music, the clicking of cameras, felt like nails being driven into his conscience. His phone rang incessantly. His assistant called. Cassandra called. His best man knocked. But he answered none of them. Because today was not his wedding day. It was his day of reckoning. He knew what he had to do, but part of him feared the cost. Cassandra was not a woman to lose gracefully. And once he pulled the string, the whole web would unravel. Cassandra stood in the bridal suite in a gown that cost millions. She was surrounded by stylists, makeup artists, and photographers. Her beauty was undeniable, radiant and regal. But beneath the surface, she was a volcano simmering. Raymond hadn't shown up to the final rehearsal. He hadn't responded to messages. And he hadn't looked at her the same since the confrontation. Still, she told herself he'd come around. He had to. She had invested too much. As she smiled for the cameras, she whispered instructions to her assistant to double-check that Adora was not on the premises. She had already paid off someone to get Adora fired from the catering crew and barred from a venue. She couldn't risk Raymond laying eyes on that woman again. Not now. But deep inside, fear gnawed at her. She had seen something terrifying in Raymond's eyes yesterday. It wasn't just disappointment. It was finality. The hall was packed. The orchestra began the opening symphony. Guests turned to look as Cassandra walked down the aisle, her smile calculated, her steps measured. The priest stood ready. Raymond emerged from the side door, dressed in his tuxedo now, but his face was unreadable. As Cassandra approached, she noticed something in his hand, papers. He didn't extend his arm to receive her. Instead, he took the microphone. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm but thunderous, "I have something to say." A hush fell over the crowd. Cassandra's smile froze. 3 years ago, I was lied to. I was manipulated into divorcing my wife, Adora, and abandoning my unborn son. I was shown forged messages, fake documents, and I believed them. Today, I've discovered the truth. Cassandra Nwankwo orchestrated it all. Gasps filled the air. The priest stepped back. Cassandra's mouth opened in horror. Raymond turned toward the crowd and held up the DNA result. "This child is mine, and the woman I should be marrying is not here in a wedding gown. She's out there, scrubbing tables to survive." Silence reigned, and then the room erupted in chaos. The uproar was instant. Some guests gasped audibly, others covered their mouths, and many instinctively pulled out their phones to record what was quickly becoming the scandal of the year. The orchestra stopped playing, the choir fell silent, and all eyes turned toward Cassandra, her expression frozen, mouth slightly ajar, sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. Raymond stepped away from her, disgust thick in his eyes. She reached out, trying to take his hand, but he stepped back. "Raymond, no. You're humiliating me. You don't know what you're doing," she cried. But he did. He knew exactly what he was doing, unraveling years of lies, removing the mask from the woman he once believed was his savior. "You lied to me. You destroyed a family. You made me think my wife was a whore and that my son wasn't mine." His voice was sharp and cutting. "And you think I'll still marry you after that?" A journalist from a celebrity blog was already live-streaming the moment. Viewers watching around the country were flooding social media with hashtags like #WeddingScandal, #CassandraExposed, and #TheCleanerSChild. Cassandra's family looked horrified. Her father tried to approach Raymond, but security blocked him. She stood there humiliated, trembling, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized she had lost everything. She began screaming at the crowd, at Raymond, at her assistant, blaming everyone but herself. You all want to ruin me. You planned this. That woman put you up to this, she shouted. But no one was listening anymore. People began leaving their seats, shaking their heads. Some were angry at the drama. Others satisfied at the downfall of a woman they always suspected was too perfect. The wedding was effectively over, the altar now a war zone of truth and disgrace. Raymond walked out without looking back, removing the ring from his finger and dropping it to the floor. Outside the hall, the sun had reached its peak, shining down on the scene like a spotlight on justice. Raymond walked straight past the media and the photographers, ignoring their questions. He got into his car and gave his driver one simple instruction: take me to Adora. As the vehicle sped away, Raymond felt an unfamiliar sensation: liberation. He had finally torn down the curtain of deception that had held him hostage for 3 years. But even as he left Cassandra behind, he knew his real battle had just begun. Would Adora forgive him? Would Chinedu accept him? Could he piece together the family he had destroyed? He didn't have the answers yet. But for the first time in a long time, Raymond wasn't acting out of pride or fear. He was acting out of love, and that made all the difference. Back inside the venue, the air turned acidic. Cassandra's screams echoed down the hall as guests fled the embarrassment, some murmuring about refunds and damaged reputations. The media, like vultures, circled in gleeful delight, bombarding her with flashing lights and questions she couldn't answer. Her assistant disappeared, having had enough of her rage and blame. Cassandra stood alone now, her once majestic gown stained with tears and the sweat of humiliation. For years, she had curated an image of elegance and poise, but now the mask had slipped. The world saw her not as a queen, but as a villain, and in the cruel court of public opinion, redemption was rarely given. Her sponsors began pulling out. The endorsement deals she was supposed to sign the next week were canceled within hours. Her social media platforms flooded with hate, and bloggers dug up old scandals like vultures picking apart a carcass. Raymond's story, however, went viral in the opposite direction. News of a billionaire who halted his wedding upon discovering the truth about his long-lost son stirred national conversation. The emotional letter Adora had written, once forgotten, was now read aloud by a popular journalist who had retrieved it from Raymond himself. Hashtags like hashtag Adora deserve better and hashtag Father's Redemption trended for days. Public sympathy shifted entirely in her favor. Though she remained silent, the media hunted for her, hoping for an exclusive. But Adora wanted no part of the spotlight. She remained in her small apartment, shielding Chinedu from the noise. Her priority was not the drama, but the safety and emotional well-being of her child. Still, whispers of what Raymond had done reached her. Neighbors told her. Coworkers sent her clips. But she remained unmoved, at least on the surface. What no one saw was the inner storm brewing inside her. Adora was overwhelmed by the sudden attention, the threat of Cassandra retaliating, and most of all, the possibility that Raymond might truly want to come back. She didn't know if she could trust him. Pain was not easily forgotten, and forgiveness was not something handed out like spare change. She had bled in silence, struggled in shadows, and now everyone wanted a quote, a statement, a headline. But this wasn't about fame or pity. It was about her child. Would letting Raymond back in bring healing or more heartbreak? And if she refused him, would Chinedu grow up blaming her for keeping his father away? The questions ate at her soul. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Adora opened it, and there he stood, Raymond Okonkwo. No suit, no entourage, no cameras. Just a man, broken but sincere, holding a small bouquet of lilies and a folded photo of their child in his palm. "Please," he said quietly, "I've come home." Adora stood in stunned silence, her hand still gripping the doorknob as Raymond remained at her doorstep, visibly stripped of the arrogance and grandeur he once carried like a second skin. He didn't look like the powerful millionaire gracing business magazine covers. He looked like a man lost in guilt. His eyes were sunken with sleeplessness, his clothes wrinkled and rain-spotted, and his trembling hand offered her a bouquet of lilies, her favorite. I didn't come with excuses, he said quietly, only the truth. Adora stared at him for a long moment before stepping aside, wordlessly allowing him in. The apartment was dim and modest, a single-room space with a creaking fan and a gas stove that had clearly seen better days. Raymond's eyes scanned the place, and every detail stabbed him with shame. This was how she had been living while he wined and dined in penthouses. She gestured toward a small stool, and he sat down like a guilty child awaiting judgment. "Why now?" she asked finally, arms crossed. "Why after all these years?" Raymond bowed his head. "Because I was a fool. I let someone fill my head with lies, and I didn't even give you a chance to defend yourself." He took out the DNA result and placed it gently on the table. "I know the truth now. He's mine. I should have known the moment I saw his eyes." Adora blinked rapidly, fighting the surge of emotion threatening to drown her. "You should have listened to me back then, Raymond," she said, her voice breaking. "You humiliated me. You threw me away like I was dirt. I begged you. I carried our son alone. And now you think you can walk in and fix everything with flowers and paper." Her words stung, but he didn't argue. He only nodded, swallowing the pain like bitter wine. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to earn the right to try." Adora turned away from him and walked to the small mattress where Chinedu lay sleeping, oblivious to the storm in the room. "He thinks you died," she whispered. "That's the only way I could explain your absence." Raymond's heart shattered. He lowered his head and covered his face with his hands. "Then let me live again. Let me show him that I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Adora spoke without turning around. "He doesn't need promises. He needs presence. You want to prove yourself? Start by being there for him. Not as a millionaire, not as a man trying to win back a woman, but as a father who's ready to learn how to love what he lost." Raymond nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. It wasn't the reunion he had imagined, but it was real. It was raw. And for the first time in years, it was honest. Raymond returned the next day, not in a Rolls-Royce, not with security detail, but in a simple shirt and trousers with a second-hand storybook tucked under his arm. When Adora opened the door, Chinedu was sitting at the table trying to draw a cartoon character on a torn notepad. Raymond crouched beside him and gently said, "Hi, I'm Raymond. I'm your friend." The boy looked up, slightly confused, but not afraid. "Are you the man from the big party?" he asked innocently. Adora held her breath as Raymond smiled. "Yes. But more importantly, I'm someone who really wants to read you a story today. Would you let me?" Chinedu nodded, and Raymond took a seat on the bare floor beside him. That day, Raymond read 4 stories, drew with the boy, and even helped fix the broken leg of his toy truck. He didn't talk about the past. He didn't ask Adora for attention. He simply stayed, patient and present. Day after day, he returned. Sometimes with groceries. Sometimes with learning books. Once, he came with a small battery-powered fan after seeing how hot the room got at night. Adora remained cautious, watching closely, guarding her heart like a fortress. But she couldn't deny what she saw. Raymond wasn't faking this. He wasn't swooping in like a hero. He was learning to become a man worthy of his child. Chinedu warmed up to him faster than she expected, calling him Uncle Ray, and laughing freely in his presence. It was bittersweet for Adora to watch. On one hand, it was healing to see her son feel a father's warmth, but on the other, it reminded her of the years she had cried herself to sleep while Raymond held someone else. Her trust was still fragile, but something inside her was thawing. One evening, as Raymond and Chinedu played with alphabet blocks on the floor, Adora watched them from the corner of the room. Raymond glanced up and met her eyes, then gestured for her to join them. She hesitated, then slowly came over. Chinedu beamed, pulling her hand toward the game. For the first time in years, they sat together, mother, father, and child, in the same space, sharing laughter. It wasn't a perfect family yet, but it was a glimpse of what could be. That night, after Chinedu fell asleep, Raymond walked to the door and paused. "Thank you for letting me try," he whispered. Adora didn't respond with words, only nodded. But in that moment he saw it, the softening in her eyes, the hint of forgiveness taking root. Redemption wasn't a sprint. It was a journey. And for Raymond Okonkwo, that journey had only just begun. Weeks passed, and slowly, something remarkable began to unfold. The walls around Adeora's heart, once built with grief and reinforced with survival, began to crack. Raymond no longer visited sporadically. He became part of a rhythm. He walked Chinedu to school in the mornings, attended his school recitations, and even started learning how to braid the boys' hair properly for cultural day at school. People in the neighborhood began whispering. At first, they thought Adora had found a new sponsor, but soon they realized this wasn't about money. Raymond wasn't living lavishly. He wore simple clothes, greeted elders with humility, and always carried books or food, not cash or flash. He was rebuilding a relationship, not a reputation. And Adora, though still guarded, could no longer deny that his actions spoke louder than the pain of the past. One evening, she invited him to stay for dinner. It was a small thing, yam porridge and boiled eggs, but the invitation carried weight. They sat on the floor and ate together like a family again. Chinedu giggled as Raymond attempted to tell a bedtime story in Igbo. His accent terrible, but his effort heartwarming. Later, as they washed the plates together, Adora asked softly, "Do you regret it?" Raymond paused, looked at her, and replied, "Every single day. But I'm thankful I still have a chance to be here." Adora looked down, struggling to hold back the tears. "You broke me, Raymond. You broke everything. And yet somehow, you've made space to start again." It was the closest she had come to expressing forgiveness. Raymond gently reached for her hand, but she didn't pull away. They stood there in silence, their hands loosely clasped over the running tap water, healing finally blooming between them. What they had wasn't just a reunion, it was rebirth. They didn't rush anything. No grand gestures. No declarations. Just steady, intentional love. Raymond took care of little things, repairs in the house, surprise school pickups, helping Adora open a small Accra business to earn steady income. He wasn't trying to erase the past. He was trying to build a new future. One night, while putting Chinedu to bed, the boy asked, "Mummy, can Uncle Ray be my real daddy now?" Adora blinked, her heart thudding. She looked at Raymond, who froze at the question. Then she smiled and kissed her son's forehead. "He already is, my love." Raymond's eyes welled with tears, and in that tiny room, once filled with sorrow and shadows, the light of family glowed again. It was quiet. It was imperfect. But it was beautiful. Cassandra's silence after the wedding scandal was not weakness. It was strategy. The media painted her as the scheming socialite who had stolen a man from his wife, manipulated a millionaire, and got exposed at the altar. She had become a viral disgrace. But Cassandra had survived worse storms in her past, and her mind, sharp, bitter, and vengeful, was already crafting a plan. If she couldn't have Raymond, she would destroy the version of him that the world now admired. The man of redemption, the humble father, the loving partner. If he wants to rebuild his life, she hissed to herself one evening, let's see how strong the foundation really is. She began making calls, digging up old emails, threatening former associates. Then she reached out to an online gossip columnist who thrived on scandal. "He's a fraud," she told them. "The new Raymond is just a performance. Wait until you see what I send you." Days later, the internet exploded with anonymous accusations. Cassandra had doctored receipts and falsified conversations, suggesting Raymond had embezzled funds from one of his earlier real estate projects, a scandal that had long been buried after it was resolved internally. The headline screamed, "Is Raymond Okonkwo's redemption a lie?" From wedding scandal to financial fraud. The media began circling again, investors started pulling back from ongoing deals, and whispers of another investigation crept into Raymond's boardroom. Though Raymond was innocent, the documents were outdated and resolved. Public perception once again threatened to ruin him. His board members called for explanations. His assistant expressed concern. Even some of his old allies began to question his recent decisions. The attacks were coordinated, intentional. Cassandra was behind it, and Raymond knew it. He didn't respond publicly. Instead, he focused on what mattered most, his son and Adora. Still, the pressure mounted. Adora began receiving strange visitors at her Acura stand, reporters pretending to be customers, asking invasive questions. Once, someone even threw a stone through her window with a note that read, "He'll leave you again." The fear returned, gnawing at her peace. One night, she sat Raymond down. "Maybe we're not meant to be together in this world, Ray," she said, tears in her eyes. "People like Cassandra, they don't stop." But Raymond took her hands and said firmly, "Let them come. Let the world break me again. But I'm not running this time. I lost you once, Adora. I will fight to the last breath to keep you now." His words wrapped around her like armor. The next morning, he released a calm, clear video addressing the allegations, revealing full documentation that cleared his name, and exposing Cassandra's history of manipulation with legal proof. The tide began to turn again, but not without scars. The public apology video went viral for all the right reasons. In it, Raymond didn't present himself as a victim or play the sympathy card. He calmly laid out the truth. The financial records had been cleared by auditors years ago, and the documents recently leaked were outdated. More importantly, he named Cassandra directly, exposing her as the source behind the forgery, and even playing a voicemail recording where she threatened to drag him down to nothing. That voicemail, filled with venom, hit the internet like a match to gasoline. Public sympathy shifted once more, this time with full force. Influencers who had mocked Raymond now rallied to his defense. Bloggers who had dragged Adora now praised her strength. Cassandra became a symbol of toxicity, and even her few remaining supporters fell silent. Meanwhile, Raymond took legal action. He pressed charges for defamation and attempted extortion. Cassandra was summoned to court, and though she tried to avoid it, the evidence was airtight. Her empire, what little remained, collapsed. Sponsors withdrew, her businesses crumbled, and eventually, she was arrested for falsifying financial records. The woman who once stood proudly at the altar now faced possible prison time. Raymond, however, chose not to gloat. He issued a statement saying he hoped Cassandra would seek help. Adora read that statement twice. It reminded her of the man she had married years ago, the one with integrity and quiet dignity. Her trust in him deepened, not just because he fought for her, but because he did so with grace. One evening, after walking Chinita home from school, Adora stood beside Raymond in the kitchen. She was quiet, thoughtful. He was stirring egusi soup, a dish he had been trying, and hilariously failing, to master for weeks. She finally said, "I see the man I once loved. But more than that, I see a father, a protector, a man who's not afraid to admit he was wrong." Raymond paused and looked at her, eyes soft. "I only want one thing, Adora. Not fame, not business, just a second chance." She stepped closer and rested her head on his shoulder. "Then take it," she whispered. "But this time no lies, no pride, just us." That night, they slept with Chinita between them on the same mattress that had once been too small for dreams. Now, it held the weight of love reborn, trust rebuilt, and a family healing in real time. The decision to marry again was not made in haste. It wasn't born from pressure or spectacle. It grew from quiet mornings, honest conversations, and laughter that had returned to their little home. Raymond insisted on something simple, private, and meaningful. No cameras. No gold-plated cake. "Just you, me, and Chinita," he said. Adora agreed. They chose a small garden chapel near the coast, where the breeze smelled of salt and hibiscus. She wore a modest white gown donated by one of her market friends. He wore a blue native outfit, simple but elegant. Chinita, ever the light of their union, served as the ring-bearer, wearing a tiny bata that made everyone smile. There were no celebrities, no press, just real friends, some extended family, and one powerful vow: to never let pride destroy what love had built again. The ceremony was emotional. When Raymond knelt before Adora, it wasn't just a gesture, it was repentance. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said as he slid the ring onto her finger. "And for raising our son with strength I didn't have." Adora's tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from release. She had held so much in for so long, And now, surrounded by genuine love, she finally let it all go. Their kiss was long and warm. No cheering crowd, no paparazzi, just the rustling of palm leaves and the chorus of nature applauding them. Afterward, they sat around a shared table with friends and laughed over jollof rice, suya, and pepper soup. There were no formal speeches, just joy, unscripted, pure. Later that night, back in their home, Raymond placed a key into Adeora's hand. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. "It's not a gift. It's a symbol." He led her outside, where a black SUV waited. The driver took them to a quiet neighborhood on the mainland, to a newly renovated house with fresh paint and a garden that bloomed with white roses. "This is your house, Adeora. In your name. No cameras. No press. Just a space for you and Chinedu. And if you'll have me too." Adeora was speechless. She stared at the house, then at the man who had once destroyed her world, now rebuilding it with bricks of humility and love. She wrapped her arms around him, whispered a prayer, and said the words that finally healed them both. "Welcome home, Raymond." And this time, they were truly home. Months passed, and the pain of the past began to feel like a distant shadow. Adeora's life transformed in ways she had never imagined, not because Raymond showered her with wealth, but because peace finally bloomed in her heart. Their new home was modest compared to the mansions Raymond once lived in, but it was filled with warmth, laughter, and healing. Raymond insisted on keeping things simple, not out of guilt, but because he had learned the value of presence over possessions. He drove Chinedu to school every morning, made breakfast with burnt toast and 2-sweet tea, and sometimes returned from the office with handmade crafts that never quite made sense, but made Adeora laugh. The small Accra business Adeora started blossomed too, especially after Raymond helped her expand to a food truck with her name boldly printed, Adeora's Delight. But what touched Adeora most was how Raymond made no attempt to erase her struggle. He respected it, honored it. One evening, as the sun set behind their garden, Raymond called Adeora and Chinedu outside. "Close your eyes," he said gently. Chinedu squealed with excitement, while Adeora gave him a skeptical look. Still, she played along. When they opened their eyes again, they stood in front of a magnificent surprise, a newly completed 2-story mansion, painted ivory white with touches of gold. It stood tall and proud like a reward for every tear Adeora had ever shed. She gasped, covering her mouth. "Raymond, what is this?" He smiled, eyes soft. "This is yours. Not a wedding gift, not compensation, but a home. A place where your name is etched in the foundation, not forgotten in the cracks. This land, it's in your name, Adeora. You deserve to never clean another person's table again. You'll own them now." Tears welled in her eyes. She had scrubbed banquet tables, toilets, and greasy kitchen floors. She had been laughed at, forgotten. But now she stood on her own land, in her own home, beside her husband and son, no longer a story of pity, but power. The housewarming became a celebration not just of real estate, but of love's redemption. Old friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had followed their story came with gifts, songs, and testimonies. The woman who had once knelt on floors to clean now stood at the doorway of her mansion, hugging guests, her son proudly introducing her as "my mummy, the strongest woman in the world." Raymond gave a small speech under the soft lights of the porch. "I once lost everything because of pride, lies, and foolishness. But this woman," he said, holding Adeora's hand, "she loved me through it all, even when I didn't deserve it. Today, she's not just my wife. She's my miracle." The crowd cheered. Adeora looked around, the glowing faces, the laughter, her son dancing barefoot across the tiled floor, and realized her story had come full circle, from cleaner to queen, from heartbreak to wholeness. And as the stars lit up the night sky, Adeora whispered to herself, This is what love looks like when it's real." And finally, she rested, in a home built not by wealth, but by truth, tears, and triumph. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tales by TOCHI for more.